Some nights arrive cloaked in an unusual silence, pressing softly against your thoughts as you settle in, unsure whether you will drift swiftly into the stream of sleep or cling, just a bit longer, to the edges of your conscious mind. You seek comfort, perhaps a sense of stability, a gentle assurance that each day's efforts amount to more than spinning wheels in sand. You wonder if, beneath the surface of your ordinary routines, your routines of ambition, your quiet battles against inertia, there isn't some deeper, unseen current at work, tracing patterns of the darkness that will one day lift you towards something entirely new. Have you ever lain awake, tracing the shape of your own persistence, feeling both its weight and its hope? Maybe you felt it when, late at night, the world outside falls away, and the only thing left is you. Your intentions, your doubts, the half-remembered plans you swore you would fulfill. Tonight, in this story meant for the hush between waking and dreaming, we'll travel somewhere unexpected, not toward the thunderous echoes of grand achievements, but along quieter waters, a journey led by a persistent force that shapes lives almost despite us. It whispers beneath decisions and disappointments, not as the roar of willpower in the frenzy of daylight, but as a subtle energy flowing on, even when we lie still with our eyes closed. It is a kind of force that doesn't just push through obstacles. It seeps under them, adapts, and always finds a way forward, surprisingly gentle yet resolutely unstoppable. Have you noticed how different things can look in the solitude of night? Fears appear larger or sometimes, strangely, less intimidating. Hopes shift in quality, perhaps less urgent, but more grounded. Maybe you, too, sense that there is something unique about the hours when most of the world is sleeping, a hidden territory where your mind can wander free, settling on connections and insights you could scarcely perceive in the rush of the day. Within this darkness, where the only illumination might be the pale glow of distant streetlights or the soft reflection of the moon, is it possible that an unseen work unfolds, a work not sparked by conscious intention, but by a deeper, older rhythm? Picture persistence not as a fierce, never-ending struggle, but as an underground river, invisible yet constant, pressing onward beneath the landscapes of your waking life. In the tales you're about to hear, this river is more than a metaphor. It burrows quietly through the stone of custom and habit, shaping destinies not just in broad daylight, but through the gradual shifts that happen when we surrender to rest. Here, in these stories, persistence takes on a form you may not have considered, a form not of effort but flow, not of force but of energy. Could it be that, when you place your head on your pillow and let go of the day, this current continues to carve fresh channels in the foundation of your mind and spirit? That, by morning, you can wake to a transformed inner landscape, subtly restructuring the night? If you've ever felt weary from striving, if the idea of progress seems tangled with exhaustion, this night, we'll explore another way. The questions we'll ask are not simple, and their answers may not reveal themselves all at once. What if the greatest strength lies not in relentless action, but in the kind of surrender that is still purposeful, still quietly bold? What if, even while you sleep, the forces you've set in motion continue their work, harnessing the quiet energy of persistence to carry you further than you could manage alone? So allow yourself, just for the span of the story, to lie back and glide downstream with the current. Let your mind drift through unfamiliar landscapes and ancient wisdom, where the boundaries between effort and ease dissolve, and where the path forward reveals itself not in a burst of light, but in the gentle movement of waters smoothing stone over time. Along the way, listen to the whispers beneath the storyline, the hints and questions that might beckon you to reconsider how you grow, how you heal, and how, perhaps, you become quietly unshakable. Before you close your eyes tonight, you'll enter a story in which your own persistence is not merely a tool for conquering the world, but mysterious, tireless energy that, while you rest, continues to shape you softly, powerfully, and forever onward. It was a night of flickering candlelight and half-open windows when Clara, an aging librarian with a quiet resilience, found herself unable to sleep. The city outside murmured softly, and the moonlight climbed across stacks of battered books she collected, silent sentinels documenting the ambitions of countless eras. On the armchair's faded velvet, Clara fidgeted with a worn coin, feeling the grooves with her thumb, pondering a dilemma that pressed in nightly. Why did her deepest intentions, fresh and luminous in the morning, fade by dusk, she thought of the projects forever postponed, the letters never sent, and the garden languishing in late summer neglect. Tonight, however, something within her shifted. Instead of the usual self-reprimand, another question, quieter but sharper, emerged. What the invisible energies she dismissed were actually at work when her conscious focus faded. In the neighboring flat, Andres, a passionate sculptor whose hands bore stories of both triumph and defeat, slumped over a slab of marble. By daylight, his chisel challenged the stone, but in the velvet darkness, disappointment often shadowed his determination. As silence filled his small studio, he stared at an unformed block, once his boldest ambition, now frozen in indecision. Yet, lying back and let his thoughts drift, he noticed that ideas, odd and unexpected, seemed to surface only after he let go of the fight. As if, when surrender replaced strain, some inner current brought him new inspiration, reshaping not just his vision but his very approach. Meanwhile, far across the city, a night shift nurse named Marta trudged through softly lit corridors, pausing at open doors and whispered requests. Persistence or it took a different form. It was not a matter of chasing ideals, but of enduring moment by moment the unpredictable tides of exhaustion and empathy. Where others might see only repetition, Marta detected subtle shifts, a word of comfort easing a patient's pain, a smile exchanged with a colleague. Each small act braided itself into the night, unwitnessed but transformative, showing that quiet, sustained care could, over time, uproot despair and cultivate hope. While these three knew nothing of one another, something unseen connected them. Under the surface, an unseen reservoir pooled and pressed, cycling their frustrations into resources and hardships into quiet growth. This undercurrent rarely announced itself with grand revelations or thunderous insight. Instead, it was a ferocious persistence of a seed splitting stone, the resilience of roots snaking through compacted earth. Consider, now, how your own experience mirrors or divides from theirs. When fatigue weighs heavy and you retreat from action, does your story halt? Or is it, perhaps, that something beneath the visible surface rearranges itself quietly, preparing for your next step? As hours pass and midnight dissolve into the early blue of morning, each of them, Clara with her restless questions, Andres resting beside his uncarved marble, Marta sighing in the soft-hued break room, felt an inexplicable steadiness return. None could fully trace its source. The lull allowed their minds to wander down unfamiliar corridors, stumble upon solutions left behind by their hurried day minds. Could it be, then, that these nightly pauses allowed space for unexpected routes to form? Not brute resolve bludgeoning obstacles, but the subtle migration of thoughts, feelings, and intentions, reshaping, rerouting, and replenishing strength. Across cultures and centuries, there have always been tales of those who, pausing under strange stars as much as they battle by daylight, found that true tenacity dwells in a willingness to ebb and flow with unseen forces. Might the wisdom of our ancestors, whether embedded in folklore or whispered behind closed doors, have always hinted at this, that yielding at just the right moment is not defeat, but another dimension of persistence entirely? As dawn crept in, illuminating faces changed by the mysteries of night, each person awoke to a subtle internal shift, renewed not by relentless toil, but by what they'd allowed to happen in that gentle pause. It invites you to wonder, what changes while you sleep, tireless and unnoticed, that arms you for the day ahead? And when you finally rise, blinking into morning light, are you willing to trust that the quiet work of the night, as elusive as it is constant, is already shaping you toward what you are quietly becoming? If anything in these lives echoes in your own, consider sharing how you sense these silent forces carving new paths through your routines, sometimes when you least expect it. Clouds gathered above the ancient bridge of stone, veiling the moon and scattering silver ripples over the surface of the slow-moving river below. On this particular night, the wind brought not only the scent of rain, but the distant sound of laughter and music from a humble tavern nestled on the other side. Among its patrons sat Lucio, a clockmaker haunted by unfinished blueprints and a persistent ticking doubt that gnawed at the edges of his mind. Lucio's life, measured in fragments, gear scattered across his workbench, plans etched in margins, promises stashed in drawers, had become an endless chain of beginnings, none quite joined to an end. Yet tonight, a different current tugged at him. Instead of obsessing over what remained unaccomplished, he allowed himself to be drawn into the revelry, compelled by a curiosity he couldn't name. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of that lively festival, an enigmatic figure leaned against the bridge's mossy rail, cradling a lantern whose flame danced in cadence with each gust. This was Syrah, a traveler whose journey through cities, fields, and forgotten paths had revealed patterns few dare to see, a hidden tapestry spun from people's subtle choices and unseen forces at play. It wasn't merely action or rest that intrigued her, but the delicate transformation that occurred in the spaces between, those pauses when intent gathered strength just out of sight. As Lucio approached, nursing a cup warmed by cinnamon and memory, she spoke quietly, her eyes reflecting both the river and the storm. "What draws you to that celebration, night after night, when so much remains unresolved?" she inquired, her voice winding through him like a riddle. Lucio responded after a contemplative pause. "Some say persistence is only about pushing forward, endlessly. But I wonder, is there merit in moments like these, when I simply let myself drift? Can joy, too, forge a path through stone?" Syrah regarded him with a gentle smile, recognizing in his uncertainty a spark she had witnessed across many lifetimes and landscapes. Instead of offering comfort, she posed a different kind of question. "Have you ever noticed how rivers find ways around obstacles, shaping the banks without ever rushing the process? What if your most powerful acts of creation are born not from force, but from the patient gathering of energy at just the right instant?" Rain began to tap against ancient stones, and both found shelter in the hollow beneath the arch. Lucio, emboldened by Syrah's challenge, reflected on his grandfather's orchard, a wild tangle compared to the disciplined rows of neighbors, yet every season it yielded the sweetest plums. "He always said the earth takes its own time, no matter how you prod it," Lucio mused, voice caught between resignation and awe. Now, in this hush, he saw his legacy reframed. Perhaps the seasons in which nothing seemed to happen mattered as much as the fevered bursts of accomplishment. He caught himself wondering aloud, if I ceased to measure progress only in deadlines and outcomes, would I find the energy I thought I'd lost? Might my ideas, like seeds, ripen in quiet, unseen ways? Shifting his gaze to Syrah, Lucio was startled to discover the truth of her insight written upon the river itself. The gentle, ceaseless current that, while appearing lazy under the gathering night, had long ago carved a valley, shaped the fertile soil, and connected distant villages. Something in him unclenched. He realized that the silent accumulation of quiet nights, like this one, could be just as essential as daytime striving, perhaps, for certain dreams, even more so. From her lantern, Syrah drew a thin, golden thread. She tied it around a stone and handed it to Lucio. This is not a token of triumph, but a reminder. Even tethered, movement continues. The river does not break its bounds, yet nothing can forbid its flow. Lucio, feeling the weight and the warmth of Syrah's wisdom, pressed the stone to his heart. Now, let yourself imagine what it might feel like, standing beneath that bridge, the rain falling softly, the river gliding below, a newfound understanding dawning in your chest. Could it be that the next surge of energy you crave is already coiling quietly in the hush before morning? That the very act of pausing, listening, and gathering your scattered intentions might fuel persistence in ways that sleepless struggle never could? Consider how your own story could shift if you trusted, just for one night, in the river's relentless, gentle passage, and let yourself be changed by its hidden strength. As mist crept along the deserted avenue, a distant church bell called out the onset of a new hour, drawing a shiver from Olalla as she hastened her pace. She was a physicist by profession, renowned for her almost obsessive exactitude. But what kept her awake was not the neat certainties of equations, but the infinite variables of human passion and failure. That night, a rumor had reached her, a legend whispered in the faculty's old corridors about a manuscript, centuries old, that chronicled how ancient navigators sensed their way across uncharted waters long before astrolabes or compasses. According to enigmatic letters scribbled in its margin, these voyagers relied on a peculiar nocturnal sensitivity, an intuition honed not in the blinding rush of storms, but in the slumbering calm, when all seemed still, but the spirit remained vigilant. Armed with curiosity, she resolved not merely to study phenomena, but to live them, to see if, While the mind quieted, a subtler awareness could indeed ripple beneath the surface. While the city's rhythm dulled to a distant murmur, Olala made her way to her workspace, an attic brimming with star maps, forgotten journals, and instruments whose uses even she could only guess. There, she recalled how her own life had often pivoted not on the frantic chase of data, but on revelations dawning unexpectedly after idle evenings, a lingering melody sparking a late-night insight, or the click of a switch suddenly illuminating a hypothesis that had, for weeks, eluded her. Tonight, she made a conscious decision to cultivate idleness, trusting in its creative potential. Shadows played on the ceiling as she lay back, open not just to solutions that logic could birth, but to whatever might emerge when logic faded and imagination reigned. As moonbeams nudged across faded wallpaper, the boundaries between thought and dream blurred, awakening fragments of memory, echoes of past experiments, and flickers of intuition she'd previously discounted. Not every notion would be coherent by morning, she knew, but patterns sometimes coalesce from apparent chaos, a principle as true in nature as in the heart. Simultaneously, streets away in an elegant but forlorn apartment, an elderly violinist named Eugenio surrendered to a different kind of waiting. He had been a prodigy, his ambition burnished and battered by decades of competition, acclaim, and disappointment. Now, years after his last applause, he found comfort in ritual, the careful tuning of strings, the soft glow of lamplight, the silence that hummed with possibility. Each night, after the city's din subsided, he would rest a violin on his chest, trusting that music, like water in an aquifer, could seep into him anew if he just let himself listen quietly enough. One evening, in that magnetic stillness before slumber, a forgotten melody returned, distant yet insistent, tied not to any score but to childhood afternoons in his grandmother's perfumed garden. The next day, bow in hand, his fingers found the notes as if guided by something older, something patiently cultivated in the slow-turning wheels of memory. In both these lives, persistence was transformed, revealed not as a relentless force, but as a capacity to receive, to let the unscripted and the serendipitous find a foothold. Now, picture a moment when you, too, stand on the brink of giving up pursuit, tempted to extinguish a hope because progress appears invisible. What if, instead, you linger, as Olala does with her nocturnal maps, or listen, as Eugenio does with quiet strings? These intervals, so easy to dismiss as empty or unproductive, might actually serve as crucibles, unseen but transformative, where the work of persistence deepens beyond conscious grasp. In moments such as these, fresh metaphors for endurance appear. The pulse of tides guiding lost vessels, the silent interlude where inspiration builds in wings. Consequently, one may start to believe that certain truths only arrive if given room to gather undisturbed. Olala's discoveries and Eugenio's revived melodies prompt a question that lingers. When was the last time you welcomed silence as an ally, trusting it to nurture the roots of tomorrow's breakthrough? Invite yourself to notice such moments, and perhaps share how stillness has shaped your passions in ways force never could. Sometimes, resilience waits for permission for space, for a hush deep enough to let the next current emerge. Inside the soft-lit foyer of an old theater, velvet curtains waiting to be drawn, a young stage technician named Matteo moves like a shadow among the ropes and pulleys. His job, often overlooked by those dazzled by the actor's brilliance, required him to anticipate problems before they surfaced, to address small details so quietly that even the cast barely noticed. One evening, as a revered director barked last-minute changes, and the lighting designer argued about color filters, Matteo felt caught between currents. Frustration simmered beneath the surface, not for lack of effort, but from the growing sense that his invisible work was undervalued, his steady hands never worthy of applause. On that particular night, something peculiar happened backstage. A set piece, integral to the climactic scene, began to sag ominously, a disaster in the making. While others panicked, it was a memory from his childhood that surfaced in Matteo's mind. The image of his grandmother weaving tapestries, each movement deliberate, her patience unhurried, remembering her whispered advice. Sometimes things must rest so the thread's in line. He chose not to rush with urgent fixes. Instead, he watched, observed how the weight distributed. Then, gently and with calculated care, he adjusted a single knot, realigned a pulley, and let gravity guide the rest into place. The set steadied, almost effortlessly, just as the leading actor's cue echoed through the wings. Beyond the technical victory, what lingered with Matteo was the realization that his form of persistence wasn't about charging ahead, nor staking claims in the spotlights. Rather, it was in knowing when to intervene, in trusting not only his skill, but those subtle signs that whisper for patience over impulse. The rhythm of his work resembled that of a skilled gardener who, instead of pressing seeds too deep into the earth, waits for the precise signal that the soil is ready, allowing growth to proceed at its natural pace. This night, Matteo understood that enduring progress sometimes feels invisible by design. Only those attuned to its quiet evolution can appreciate its real value. Not long after, word spread among the crew about how catastrophe had been averted. Someone asked Matteo how he'd known what to do, expecting perhaps a technical explanation or a tale of quick reflexes. Shrugging, he answered, "It's more about listening to the moment than about acting fast." This humility, unexpected in an environment that prized speed and showiness, sparked newfound respect for the almost magical patience with which he approached each challenge. Some team members even began staying a few extra minutes after rehearsals, hoping to pick up on his methods, to catch the subtle cues he noticed. Moving forward, small rituals began to blossom among the backstage team. They incorporated pauses before curtain call, moments spent observing the mechanics and mood of the space, choosing when to act and when to hold back. Tension in the group softened. Communication became more fluid. Where before only nervous anticipation reigned, now there was a growing sense of trust in the invisible, that slow ripening of outcomes which no one could hurry, but everyone could nurture. If you picture yourself in Matteo's position, tasked with holding things together where no one sees, ask yourself, how do you respond to the urge to constantly prove your presence? Do you equate importance with noise, or are you willing to recognize value in timing, in presence without hurry? Think about how the spaces where you exercise patience and discretion, waiting for the right moment, the subtle sign, might be the very places where your most profound growth unfolds, even if applause never reaches your ears. Stories such as Matteo's remind us that sometimes the strongest current lies beneath the ripples, gaining force and shaping events precisely because it resists the temptation to stand out. Would you dare to trust in your own quieter forms of persistence, even if their results are visible only in hindsight? Reflect on this as you drift tonight into the hushed unseen, where so much is crafted, delicate, resilient, and beautifully understated. On the edge of a windswept coastal town, Alba pressed her palm to the cold window pane, watching the undulating horizon where deep night met the rolling sea. She had taken sabbatical from her life as a marine biologist, troubled by an unsettling sensation that her life's course had drifted into stagnant waters. After years of relentless data gathering and disciplined grant proposals, she was no stranger to persistence in her waking hours. Yet lately, the familiar spark of discovery eluded her. Determined to abandon routine expectation, Alba shifted her attention to something overlooked. How her emotional stamina shifted in the hush after sunset, when restlessness took on an almost physical charge. Inside the cottage, the air was laced with salt and the sound of the waves. On this particular evening, her neighbor Jorge visited, clutching a battered notebook brimming with sketches of the moon's phases and annotations about ancient mariner rituals. Unlike Alba, Jorge's persistence flourished in the hours the world surrendered to sleep, a time when imagination could untangle what logic clung to tightly. He explained with quiet conviction, "At night, what weighs on heart is not dull but transformed. It's like the difference between a lantern carried against the wind and the lighthouse that stands, unwavering, channeling all its brightness skyward." His words resonated, igniting a curiosity in Alba about what form her own persistence might take when stripped of daylight's demands. As the evening stretched on, Alba shared a story she'd once dismissed as simple folklore. Local fishermen claimed that, when battered by repeated storms, their boats developed subtle imperfections that actually improved their handling over seasons. Each dent and scar changed the hull's reaction to waves, transforming initial vulnerability into greater resilience. The anecdote sparked something in Jorge, who asserted, perhaps there's wisdom in what failure leaves behind, a kind of energy that seeps into your bones over time, not obvious but no less real. After their conversation, Alba felt drawn outside. The wind had picked up, and her senses sharpened with every crashing wave. Walking along the shore, she let herself be enveloped by the sea's eerie rhythm, recalling times when progress seemed to recede with every tide. In this nocturnal solitude, her persistence didn't feel like force or even patience, but rather a gathering energy brewing silently within her, much like the hidden undertow below smooth waters. Each step became a reckoning. How many times had she believed her own word faltered, only to find, days, weeks, sometimes months later, that she'd quietly grown, her foundation fortified not by victory, but by survival and adaptation? Noticing a flock of gulls calling raucously above the cliffs, Alba sat on a smooth boulder, wind tousling her hair. A memory surfaced from childhood. Her grandmother, a seamstress, who stitched intricate patchwork by the firelight, telling her, "What endures is not what resists the storm, but what learns to shift with it, and rises softer but unbroken every morning." In this memory, Alba recognized another dimension of persistence, one less about direct confrontation, more akin to the transformative energy that accumulates with every trial, gathering force while you simply breathe through another night. Now, reflect on the moments when your own endurance feels intangible, nearly invisible, yet undeniably present, a strength swelling beneath your surface just when you sense you might collapse. How often have you discovered that what you thought was despair was, instead, the old self cracking to make space for something deeper? Invite yourself to identify those silent waves, the emotional energies that grow not with noise, but with the quiet insistence of the tide returning again and again, regardless of the day's storms. Consider sharing in the comments below which invisible energies have shaped your character in the gloom of challenging nights. It is here that the true measure of persistence often emerges, not as brute assertion, but as a subtle, steady gathering of courage and clarity, waiting for its moment to surface at dawn. A brisk wind tugged at the shutters of Lucia's small apartment as she lingered in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of mint tea. Across the room, a mess of crumpled sketches littered her drafting table, blueprints for a sculpture commission she'd been ruminating over for weeks. Despite years of artistry, she felt creatively stranded, as if the wellspring she once relied on had turned to stone. Yet tonight, a restlessness surged through her, a desire not merely to create, but to reinvent, bordering on something almost reckless. Instead of giving in to frustration or distraction, Lucia decided to brave the cold. Pulling a thick sweater over her shoulders, she stepped onto the dimly lit balcony, where the city stretched before her in a mosaic of glowing windows and distant laughter. Something about the pulse of nocturnal life below. Taxi horns in syncopation, dogs barking, the distant clatter of someone unloading crates, roused an impulse she hadn't felt since her early student days, when she and her friends would roam the city until dawn, searching for ghostly murals and hidden gardens. The ordinary rhythm of the night, far from stifling her, seemed to prod at a dormant part of her mind. As she glanced skyward, Lucia noticed something easily dismissed by most city dwellers, a scattering of faint stars poking through a gap in the clouds. Their shy presence triggered a memory of a science museum visit in her teens, a display about bioluminescent creatures that thrive by night, not in spite of darkness, but because of it. The realization was subtle but electric. Here was persistence transformed, not as a contest of stubbornness, but as an act of harnessing whatever fuel the environment provided. Pondering this, Lucia pulled out her phone and opened a blank note, typing a series of questions to herself. What if the limits around me are invitations to adapt? How often do I treat obstacles like locked gates, when they might be doors waiting for a new kind of key? Downstairs, her neighbor Pedro appeared in the courtyard, fussing with a battered delivery bike. He greeted her, gesturing her down. There, surrounded by the aroma of engine oil and crushed rosemary from planters, he confided in her about his side business, hand-delivering groceries late at night to elderly residents who'd stopped leaving their flats during the winter. It's a battle sometimes, with the weather and the stairs and grumpy dogs, Pedro admitted with a wry grin. But each night, just when I think I can't make one more delivery, someone opens the door with a story or a song or some old picture, and I remember there's more than one kind of strength. As he spoke, the tension in Lucia's shoulders eased. She recognized that what felt like creative drought was in fact a shift. Her energy was not lost, merely changing form. Compelled by this exchange, she followed Pedro on his next errand, winding through alleyways dappled by the erratic beams of streetlights. Everywhere she looked, an old woman humming to herself on a doorstep, a stray cat prancing among spilled leaves, a quiet resilience was on full display. Each person, in their corner of the city, navigated reality in a uniquely adaptive fashion. Lucia realized that persistence might not mean forging on in a familiar way, but responding to circumstances with a spirit ready to evolve at a moment's notice. By the time Lucia returned to her apartment, her thoughts had shifted. The challenge before her sculpture was no longer whether she could finish, but how she might use the friction itself as raw material. Rather than resisting her block, she began to see it as a prompt for invention. Now, think about how this plays out in your own pursuits. When the road ahead folds or cracks, do you clench your jaw and plow through, or do you allow yourself to listen for other cues, a scent, a memory, a quietly offered resource that could quietly alter your path? Sometimes, stepping into what at first feels like unfamiliar territory is the very thing that enables us to transmute stalled energy into creative momentum. Lucia's night, shaped by an openness to chance encounters and small marvels, ended with her at the work table once more, her hand steady, her heart curious, ready to begin again in ways she'd never considered by day. Back in the heart of the old city, the hour drew nearer to midnight, and a fine drizzle painted the weathered cobbles with a shimmering gloss. Far from the hum of apartments and the echoing footsteps of night wanderers, nestled behind a grocer's stall and faded murals, an unmarked forge glowed with a heartbeat of copper-orange light. Here, Ismail worked, his presence a secret even among those who frequented the narrow streets. He was a bladesmith, though not of the type who chased perfection and symmetry. His passion lay in fashioning tools from discarded metal, giving rusted hinges and snapped bicycle chains second lives as elegant, functional knives. The air was thick with the tang of hot steel and the pulse of the hammer against the anvil. Unlike artisans driven by unyielding routines, Ismail engaged the quiet hours as collaborators in his process. Tonight, the forge's shadows flickered across his furrowed brow as he studied a twisted shard of iron, the remnant of an industrial chain left to corrode decades earlier, where another might have seen only ruined material. Ismail saw latent promise, a story embedded in oxidized scars, tension stored up like roots waiting for rain. He began each project not with certainty, but with a willingness to allow the metal's peculiarities to steer the creative journey in unexpected directions. Drawing nearer the embers, Ismail murmured softly, letting the rhythm of his breath synchronize with the bellows. The clatter of rain on the tin roof mingled with the steady pulse of his heartbeat as he considered the task ahead. He was not immune to frustration. On countless evenings, potential designs dissolved into warped failures. Yet, instead of tightening control, Ismail leaned into vulnerability, adapting his approach mid-stroke. At a crucial moment, a sudden whiff of burnt oil drifted in the door, reminding him of his grandfather's workshop, where half-formed efforts often lay abandoned until weeks later, when a flash of intuition mapped the path forward. Tonight, as sparks erupted and settled on the sand-scattered floor, Ismail's work was interrupted by the arrival of a stray, a model dog, ribs showing, eyes luminous in the firelight. He tossed it across with a nod, and as he did, found himself recalling a lesson deeper than the mechanics of hand and tool, the knack for surrendering attentiveness to the moment, not imposing will but reading the flows of chance and necessity as they came. The dog's presence shifted his perspective. He found that genuine persistence sometimes meant reaching outside his own expectations, welcoming in what seemed incidental, whether a broken tool, a chance encounter, or an intuition sparked by fatigue. In the slow, repetitive dance of shaping the blade, failures accumulated quietly at his feet. Brittle tips warped spines, edges too dull to impress. Instead of discouragement, these fragments became talismans, each one whispering the lesson that real progress was inseparable from experimentation and improvisation. Ismail felt, as perhaps few do, the subtle power in refusing to interpret setbacks as endpoints. Rather, he treated every miscalculation as a variant thread in an unfolding tapestry, yielding new techniques he hadn't planned, unlocking shapes and contours beyond his initial conception. All the while, The rain's tempo shifted, drumming now with a steadier purpose. Ismail, who had once believed mastery meant dominance over matter, had come to embrace a more dynamic rapport with uncertainty. The storm outside, the surprises hidden within salvaged metal, the stray's quiet watchfulness nearby. When you next encounter your own struggles, think of the forge in Ismail's shop. Progress can emerge from relinquishing rigid plans, from welcoming the uncertain and even the chaotic as guides to layers of resilience and ingenuity you might not know yourself to possess. Just as the flicker of the forge brings unformed metal into focus, your own willingness to engage unpredictability may illuminate strengths only revealed at the edge of comfort, long after the world has quieted and the city sleeps. Reflecting on this journey so far, one cannot help but sense how each moment of rest and unrest, each pause and stirring, has quietly layered itself upon the next, much like low tides carving secret patterns beneath the surface of an expansive bay. No single instant bears the sole weight of transformation. Instead, the ripple of subtle influence moves back and forth, sometimes imperceptible, sometimes unmistakably present, leaving traces that only become visible with the slow approach of dawn. There is something deeply intriguing about the way these gently building gestures, so often overlooked, combine to exert a steady pressure that shifts the entire landscape of one's experience, moving it in directions neither anticipated nor resisted. Consider for a moment how, in the quiet stillness that follows a flurry of activity, a new awareness often flickers into being. It is as if a veil is momentarily lifted, revealing intricate lines of connection threading through the ordinary fabric of the night. Here, persistence is not a single, heroic push but feels more like wind brushing waves, an invisible hand smoothing the water until it glimmers in moonlight. This motion, patient and untiring, does not depend on any one exertion, but emerges in the very act of allowing energy to accumulate, settle, and reshape itself in quiet secrecy. Perhaps you, too, have felt this undercurrent, the sensation that progress is less a triumph of force and more the echo of countless, uncelebrated choices, sinking rhythm over time. In this twilight space between what is deliberate and what is left unfold, a peculiar vitality takes root. The night air, cool and faintly charged, incubates a kind of promise, the sense that something vital is quietly being recalibrated deep within, whenever energy is permitted to gather in its own time, along its own winding path. Images and impulses surface, not as distractions but as invitations, nudging one's attention to drift, to soften, to perceive the boundaries between effort and ease as more porous than daytime logic suggests. Through this surrender to a tempo gentler than ambition's march, a measured readiness is born, a readiness that does not clamor for a spotlight but awaits its cue, steady and enduring beneath the surface. Even as the hours stretch and contract, patience itself becomes a form of creative tension, a thread drawn taut between what has been attempted and what might still await. The stories that shimmer at the periphery of sleep, the hunches and half-dreams that dissipate with sunrise, all function as the silent architects of renewal. It is as if, while the visible world quiets, another deeper current arranges tomorrow's foundation with its own deliberate hands, laying stone upon stone in the hushed dark. With every hour passed in gentle expectation rather than anxious effort, one feels the landscape shifting, unhurried yet certain, the ground beneath realigning, the roots pressing a bit deeper into night-cooled earth. Now, as you find yourself drawing closer to closure, you might notice how these nuanced patterns, familiar yet ever-changing, are not purely passive. The night's quiet labor, so subtle in its unfolding, acts as both an echo and an answer to the pace of the waking world. This convergence, where inner determination meets invisible cultivation, calls forth not just memory, but a sharpening sense of anticipation. Something within you, perhaps, leans forward, expectant, not toward an endpoint, but toward a revelation shaped by all the gentle currents, layered insights, and evening silences that have quietly prepared the way ahead. In this drawn-out interval before resolution, it becomes clear that the journey is not a series of isolated efforts, nor a list of victories won and lost. Instead, it resembles the slow winding of a river after rain, old patterns dissolving, new channels traced beneath the surface, while surrounding landscape waits, open and watchful, for the first light to reveal how it has changed. And so, In this moment poised between ending and continuation, the story beckons you to pause, breathe, and listen for the delicate shift, assuring you that, just as the quiet persistence of night shapes the unseen and the unsaid, so too does it nurture the strength needed for what dawn will soon illuminate. As dawn approached, a gentle hush settled over the city, a moment so fragile, almost sacred, that even the restless birds held back their songs. Light seeped through the old lace curtains in Clara's apartment, blurring the sharp edges of her worries. For the first time in weeks, she rose not with a heavy ache of unfinished plans, but with a quiet readiness. At her window, with the city's rooftops bathed in the pale warmth of the early sun, she pressed her fingers to the cool glass and let herself just breathe. The previous night's questions softened in her mind, not because they had all faded away, but because they had dissolved into something gentler, an instinctive trust in her own capacity for change, one that didn't need to be forced or pressed into rigid form. Elsewhere in the city, Andres opened his eyes to the soft glow of morning on his unfinished sculpture. Without the adrenaline of relentless striving, he moved with an unhurried confidence, guided by memories drawn from those quiet hours after surrender, ideas that had drifted to him like leaves on water. His studio felt different today. It wasn't mere hope or fleeting motivation that guided his hand, but the deeper certainty that comes from having let the mind and heart run quietly over hidden currents, carving new possibilities in silence. Meanwhile, Marta stepped out into the brisk new day, her hands warming around a mug of coffee as she watched commuters stretch into routines. The exhaustion she carried was still present. Life offered no final escape from weariness, but it felt less like a wall and more like a tide that, with each return, left her a little stronger, a little steadier on her feet. She suspected now that her patient care through the night had less to do with stoic endurance and more with a force that renewed itself in every pause, every shared smile, every silent act of kindness. None of them would articulate what had changed in those hidden hours, but all felt it. Across balconies and under bridges, in the quiet workplaces and lamplit studies where stories unfolded in parallel, the city awoke subtly reshaped by the patient workings of persistence, an energy that gathered and transformed, not in grand, blazing resolve, but in the night's soft perseverance. Somewhere, perhaps within you, this same current is winding its way, slow, unseen, yet unwavering, a presence as certain as the river's ceaseless movement beneath the mountains it carved. So as your own day begins, whenever and however that may come, let yourself carry this understanding. The true art of persistence is rarely drawn by sheer force or by daylight striving alone. More often, it's sculpted by the quiet, unseen energies that keep flowing while you rest. Even as you sleep, your story is being shaped. What might first seem idle or uncertain can, over time, become the foundation for the next chapter of your becoming. There's a profound reassurance in this. You are not solely the architect of your destiny through effort and will. You are also the inheritor of all those gentle, persistent passages, nights that worked without fanfare, pauses that bred insight, moments of release that gave rise to transformation. As you move forward, consider allowing this silent strength to guide you, trusting in the energy that never fully sleeps. Even when progress seems invisible, even when doubts cluster in the silence, your persistence is flowing on, like a river in the darkness, patiently carving out a space for your brightest possibilities.